Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's 12 o'clock and the room fell silent. So I guess that is my cue to get up and speak. My name is Derek Haley. I'm the director of the Campbell Center for the Study of Animal Welfare, and I want to welcome you all to our special seminar today being presented by Dr. Beth Ventura, who is on faculty at Michigan State University. She is a graduate of Michigan State University. She got what they call in the US BS. She got her BS from Michigan State University. We call it BSc here. And she got her PhD then here in Canada at the University of British Columbia. And she's had a couple of faculty positions prior to her arrival at Michigan State earlier in 2025, she moved to Michigan State University. She had previously been at the University of Minnesota and also at the University of Lincoln in the UK. And Dr. Ventura's work importantly bridges the gap between animal welfare and the humans that care for them. And she's done work on a wide range of species, farm animals, companion animals, wildlife, and equine as well. As you can see from her slide, she's talking to us today about dairy cattle welfare, recent stories bridging farmer, veterinarian, and public perspectives. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ventura.
Hello, everyone. Just wanted to confirm everyone can hear me. Should I mic up? Would it be helpful? Okay, I'm just going to project. So nice to be here. Please call me Beth. This is a little embarrassing because it's my first time to Guelph. I'm so sorry. It's been delightful so far, and I'm a little sad that I haven't been here previous to this visit, but I'm really, really glad to be here. I know some folks, but there are a lot of new faces. So if and as you are having time to stick around afterward, I'd love to meet you, chat to you, see what you've been up to and learn from what you're doing. But I'm here today to share a little bit about some relatively-ish recent research in various stages that myself and my collaborators and my team have been working on to look at kind of the human dimension of dairy cattle welfare. I chose dairy cows because I love them, but I also tried to select some pieces from some of our work that involve Canadians. So just really like trying to be as contextual as possible. I would love a show of hands in the room. Like, who are the dairy people in the room already? Be brave and bold. Okay. So there's some dairy folks, just cow appreciators in general. Good. Okay, good. So hopefully the answer to the first question of who cares about dairy welfare is everyone. If you don't, then maybe I can convince you to that. But I wanted to just give you a little bit of a direction for the talk today. Little tiny introduction on why we care about cows. Spoiler alert, they're amazing. Share a few kind of excerpts or cases of some recent research that help, I think, me understand a little bit more about the puzzle that is like why people do the things they do and why they believe what they believe about cattle. And then like what we do with that, like how we move forward. I can't help a cow pun, so there it is. I will only visit that one more time. So when we think about who cares about dairy cattle welfare, this is a picture from a study a few years ago in Canada, in Alberta, where we were prepping for a study that I'm going to share a little bit later about. But I think it has kind of a nice capture of who are the interest groups and what's important to them. So yes, are we? Oh, I see. Yeah, that's annoying.
Your talk has not been redacted.
Yet. All right, so who cares about cows? Obviously, like the folks who work with them hopefully care quite a bit about cows. So that's farmers, that's veterinarians, that's other advisors, other folks who work with dairy cattle. And when we look to the literature, like the social science literature that's trying to understand what people prioritize about these animals, we have a pretty resounding story that if we think about the three spheres of welfare, which everyone already knows about, so I'm not going to belabor. What's going on? There we go. Biological functioning is absolutely like a really strongly held value around what is important for the animals. It's not the only thing that we know is important to these groups, but we hear this kind of over and over with our engagement with these groups. They're not the folks who work with cattle are not the only ones who care about them. The public also cares about cattle. As we know, they're an important interest group, even if they are not consumers of dairy, whether they are just citizens in the world who have something to say about the welfare of animals that are in our food systems. When we look to the literature on what that matters to them in kind of the three spheres, what is it? Shout out natural living. Yes. Natural living is a core value amongst folks who are not usually working in agriculture. They're, again, not the only people who care about natural living, but we know that this is a quite strongly held value. But there's someone missing in this conversation. Obviously, the animals. These are the most important interest groups for animal welfare conversations. And if we talk to the animals using animal welfare science, probably the answer is everything. All of these things matter for us, plus affective states as well. So I like to kind of just like sit with this for a minute to remember like the point of our science is them. And even though I embrace a lot of social sciences, I do it now to kind of center both the animals, but also the humans who work with the animals to help the people support the animals and a little bit vice versa. So I view the pursuit of social science as kind of a win-win in helping achieve improvements for animals, but also for people. It helps us kind of, as someone who's, I wouldn't call myself a social scientist because that feels like I'm like an interloper a little bit, but I really like the social sciences and I'm still learning about their use and their application. I like them because they help us account better for the needs of all of these groups as we move forward in our science and in our research. It is important that we actually center all of these voices in the room when we are pursuing research, in my opinion, because we're not going to be able to achieve progress if we're not actually listening and understanding all of these voices. The challenge is as we start to try to understand these voices and start to understand what the diverse needs are, there's going to be places where these needs intersect, and that's the win, but there's also going to be places where maybe those needs come into conflict a little bit. And so this is also why I like the social sciences, to help us start to better understand where these conflict points are and how we might start to work forward from that. So if we start to think about applications of social sciences to questions of dairy welfare or dairy cattle welfare, this is going to be slightly participatory. What would you say? I'd love to hear first from the folks who don't work much with cattle. What would you say you think are the dairy cattle welfare issues that are like biggest? That was a weird way of framing that, but you know what I mean. What are the most pressing welfare issues facing dairy cattle? Housing and lack of outdoor access, potentially. Beautiful. What else? Yeah, like the use of like what we're using with our animals. Sure. Oh, beautiful. You don't work with cows? What else?
Cow-calf pairs and
Cow-calf pairing and cow-calf separation or contact. Yeah. Was that what you were going to say? Infections, disease, health. Beautiful. My folks who are dairy people in the room who maybe are working on challenges, what are you working on? I know there's dairy people in the room. You did raise your hand. Social housing for who?
dairy calves.
Oh, interesting. Dairy calves. Nice. What else? What other issues are concerning? Heat stress. Ooh, increasingly so. Maybe less so. Is it like a huge thing? Well, yeah, it's hot in here. It's hot here. Yeah, it's hot here. Yeah. Yeah. It's just really cold right now. So like that's all I can think of. Heat stress, one thing. Okay, yes. We asked this question 10 years ago. That's devastating. We asked this question not a decade ago amongst different kind of key dairy stakeholders. We asked vets, we asked farmers, and we asked other folks kind of involved with the dairy sector. And when we asked them, these are kind of the laundry list of some of the core issues. Lameness. So I heard healthcare, beautiful. we heard disease, infection, things like mastitis and metritis, but also other things involving the health of the animal. We heard about housing, various degrees of confinement or pasture access or the lack of pasture access. We heard about concerns around disbudding or other painful procedures, end of life issues, and just the whole panoply of calf issues, how they're housed, whether they're with the mom, what we're doing with our surplus calves. So it's interesting that we asked this 10 years ago, and when I asked you now, a decade later, we have the same. I'm going to focus on three things that we have drilled in on a little bit in some of our research. And the first is lameness. Because when we drill into this is kind of the top of mind issue for folks who are working on the dairy industry. We know, and we've been talking about dairy lameness for decades. We know that this is an issue. We have widespread interest group attention to this, and yet we still struggle. And there's a lot of reasons why we still struggle to manage lameness on dairy farms. But amongst the reasons is because there's so many causes and there's so many solutions. So it's not a one size fits all solution to this problem. And with such a complex problem, I think this is really where attention to the human people or the human actors involved really become quite pressing and important and relevant. So Dr. Erin Winans is in the room. I kind of knew, but also there's her face just in case. She's amazing. I'd like to highlight some of her research because she's done one of my most kind of favorite projects that I've been involved with in recent years, because she really took a back seat, like as the driver of the research, to really incorporate and include the people who are on the ground to drive the research. And so I want to just share a little bit about that because I think it's amazing. And I think it's a really important approach with such a complex issue. It needs a complex network of actors to resolve. And when you have a complex network of actors, you're going to have communication opportunities and challenges to resolve. So what her work was attempting to do was to provide a scaffold and an opportunity for key people who work and inform and influence how lameness is dealt with on farms, to build a space for them to come together and actually connect and start to problem solve on these issues. So specifically, she was looking to form lameness action groups for folks like veterinarians and hoof trimmers and nutritionists to actually have a chance to come together and problem solve on farm. And so I'm just going to walk you through her approach because it's not maybe a common approach that we'd otherwise kind of encounter in more traditional animal welfare science approaches, or even a lot of our social science approaches. It was very participatory. So the first thing she did was recruit participants. And this was purposive, meaning we were going after folks that were already known and interested in this type of research by the research team. So starting with veterinarians first, and then the veterinarians kind of looped in the hoof trimmers and the nutritionists in their networks. So we're already kind of taking advantage of these existing networks of folks who had these connections. Ultimately, just over a dozen were recruited. And then Erin, I say we, it's not we, it's Erin, presented kind of the core research idea to these people, to the participants, to offer, here's what we're thinking, but also like, what do you want this to look like? So they were really informing the research design going forward. And then the purpose of this was for them to also enable, through a series of meetings and several workshops, for the participants themselves to build relationships and establish rapport with each other. They would work through case studies at these workshops, trying to figure out, like, how would I go about solving lameness on this farm versus this farm versus this farm? And then ultimately, at the end of these workshops, the participants were tasked with homework to form lameness advisory kind of groups with a couple of their client farms and pull in other actors that were working on these farms. So the farmers, maybe other hoof trimmers or other nutritionists or other folks who they felt were kind of important to this process. And then they sent them out, like, go forth and have meetings with the goal of having established a lameness action plan. that was calibrated and context specific to those individual client farms. Ultimately, the participants held 10 meetings on 10 different farms, and the meetings looked a little different per farm, but they usually involved reviewing lesion data and kind of walking through the barn, troubleshooting specific issues on that particular farm, and setting goals for how they were going to either prevent or treat different types of lameness that they were seeing on the farms. And then to evaluate this project, I'm not going to share with you cow level data on how that actually works on the lameness. I want to focus for now on the humans. How did this process affect the humans undergoing this activity? And so Erin interviewed these participants to try to understand what actually worked about this process to help you, kind of capacity build to deal with this welfare challenge, and what didn't work. But for now, I'm just going to share the celebration, the benefits about what worked on this farm, or what worked on this project. And so after the qualitative interviews, she performed qualitative thematic analysis. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but if you have any questions about that, come chat to me or several of the other people in this space. I see Michael there. He can also tell you a lot about that, as well as Erin or myself. But yes, I want to highlight just a few things that I think really make this approach kind of sparkle. First, participants really valued the actual research process. So they liked that it was in person. This was like right after COVID. It was before COVID. Yeah, that's right. That was a long time ago. That's another era. Yes, but they valued the in-person approach. No one likes online meetings, especially after COVID. Those are just more difficult. Sorry to everyone joining us on Zoom right now. You're a champion. And they also valued that it was really participatory. So one participant, for example, shared that I just really liked the idea and how you brought it toward us and you really took our input. It's such a simple thing, but I think a lot of times as researchers, we kind of forget that and we just do the science and then we're like, here, end user, you love it, right? You want to, no, you don't want to do that? Huh. They also really valued the opportunity to actually interact with other folks that are relevant to their work, but they didn't really have that opportunity to connect with very well. So a nutritionist shared, for example, just getting vets and consultants and trimmers together. I thought that was really good. It's something that we should do more often. I don't know if I've ever been in the same room with that many qualified people together all at once. Again, simple, but really important and really impactful. And because of these things, participants started sharing about their intention to change practice, and in some cases, how they had actually changed their practice on farm. So achieving human behavior change, which is like the golden cup of a lot of social science research, especially working on critical issues. We're hopeful to ultimately support people to change their behavior. That's nearly impossible to do. So here, for example, the hoof trimmer is sharing, the veterinarian will email me the herd report and I'll email them the trim report. So they've opened up a line of communication outside this project. The nice thing is I really enjoy reading their notes. Or a nutritionist sharing, I learned a lot there. And one of the hoof trimmers would definitely be somebody I would talk to in the future. He's very active and that was great. So again, it feels kind of simple, but my God, the amount of work that Erin put into facilitating this process was enormous. So this is not easy research to do, but I think it's really important. So that's kind of the first lesson, is that sometimes I think we forget as researchers, like, to attend to building and supporting relationships of the people we're trying to support. And I think that's just a really nice thing to think about. But we don't always want to need to or should kind of start at that point. Sometimes we have to step several steps back and just figure out what's the state of play, what's going on. And so this brings me to the next kind of story, which is calves. And we heard a little bit about calves and maybe social housing, and that's exactly where I'm going to go. So how do we normally house dairy cows and calves? Apart. The answer would be apart. So we separate the calf pretty quickly after birth. This is standard practice on most farms, dairy farms across the world, in Canada and the US, everywhere I've been anyway. But recently we've also seen a surge of research kind of looking at how else can we maybe look at this process. Can we house calves differently? Normally we house them by themselves until they're weaned from milk. This ranges maybe 8-9 weeks plus or minus, whatever, different farms do different things. And then we chunk them in with a bundle of other calves and we say, good luck. I hope you have some social skills. You don't, probably. And so folks are trying to figure out, okay, let's play around with different housing options. Let's see if there are other things that we can do. We don't have a lot of work on talking to people about this. So recently this year, this year is 2026. Last year, UBC came out with a few studies looking at farmers' experiences and perspectives, which is amazing. We're slow. We also talk to farmers. We're still working on that. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I am going to talk about another project that we did that's in press, which is trying to understand the voices of veterinarians and what they think about housing the pre-weaned dairy calf. And so this work was done with my wonderful colleague, Dr. Whitney Knauer at the University of Minnesota College of Vet Med. And we wanted to know what veterinarians who are practicing at least 25% of the time with dairy in Canada or the US, what they think. What do they think? Because no one's talked to them, which seems silly to me. And we have options for housing our dairy calves. So if you're not a dairy person, we could house them individually, either inside or outside in hutches or in pens. We could pair them inside or outside. We could put them in smallish groups under kind of 8 or 12, or bigger groups, or we could put them with the cow, or we could keep them with the cow. So we asked in a kind of online mixed method survey a number of questions. Amongst those questions was, from your perspective, what's the ideal way to do it? And basically, what can you live with? What's okay? And we asked them in kind of a quantitative way, and then we asked them kind of open-ended questions to share more about why they chose the things that they do and what their experiences are with farms that are socially housing, that are individually housing, that tried the social housing and said, heck no, I'm going to go back to individual housing. And what we see is probably not too surprising, but overall, if I throw all the veterinarians together in a sample, what you're looking at here is the types of kind of categories of calf housing, starting at the top, individual, and then kind of going down to more and more bigger or complex or difficult ways to socially house, perhaps, down to dams or potentially nurse cows. And then you see, hopefully you're not red-green colorblind, I should have thought of that, but on the left side of the slide is the most ideal, the green, moving over to the right side of the slide, which is the red, or least ideal. And so what we see here is that veterinarians tend to prefer and find either individual or we'll try pair housing as ideal. That seems to be where we're at right now. Not surprisingly, housing cows with dams or nurse cows was viewed as least ideal. And the patterns are very similar when we look at what's acceptable. And when we ask them, any thoughts about why? Beautiful. Yeah, bingo. Impacts on health and disease, or potential health and disease impacts on the calf, strongly drove preferences. And this also kind of came out in their discussions of their experiences. So one veterinarian from the US sharing, decreased pneumonia rates, as well as being able to prevent the spread of contagious diseases. That's really motivating her choice or her preference for individual housing. It's not the only reason, though. The veterinarians were very calf-centered in their reasons. So calf behavior also figuring a lot in a portion of the veterinarian's responses. So those who are opting or preferring something like pair housing or even small group housing, they are valuing that provision of social interaction, development for calves. They learn better by imitation, are better equipped later on interacting with larger groups of cows. And then the vets are also very focused on the farmers, and particularly what kind of consequences housing decisions have on labor and management for the farm. And this was interesting because the labor decisions, or sorry, the labor reasons kind of went both ways. So folks who are preferencing individual housing for calves value that it's better for labor. And the folks who are valuing larger or group housing systems value it for the labor, which is quite interesting. And there's different kind of aspects of that, but the core kind of considerations are still the same, regardless of whether they're deciding one way or the other. Our US vets were less comfortable with para and social housing systems generally compared to our Canadian vets. Those veterinarians who identify as women were also more comfortable with some types of social housing. So small groups and nurse cows in particular. The others didn't really flag as at least significantly different, which is a little interesting. We also asked them what they think the public wants. What do we think? Mom, yes. So 70% roughly of our vets in the sample think that this is going to be most acceptable. A few of them think that individual housing is going to be most acceptable to the public. I don't agree with that, but that's fine. Most of them are recognizing that individual solo housing is not going to be socially sustainable. This is in pretty strong agreement with the literature that has looked at kind of this question. The public doesn't want calves and cows separated. Okay, so we have a little bit of a tricky situation where we've got the vets valuing one option and the public way over on the other side. So then our question then maybe becomes like, what do we do about this? How might we start thinking about looking for resonance between industry or folks who are working within the livestock sectors and the general public who's maybe never set foot on a farm or hasn't thought about cows ever until you ask them, and then they say, I'd like them to be with their moms and be on pasture. How do we engage the public? Who thought this? Maybe we can just educate them. We could try, but it's not going to work. I don't think. And that might be a controversial opinion, but let me kind of try to back myself up there. I love to remind my students that we can try to tell people things, but they will respond differently to that same information because they are different. Some people, we may share something and they'll be like, oh my God, I never realized that. That aligns with my values. I'm going to come over and agree with you on this. But you might share something and that might be, whoa, I didn't know that and I hate that. I'm going to go this way instead. So we looked at this again a number of years ago that I will not attempt to quantify. This is the last study of my PhD at UBC. I had to convince Dan and Nina to let me do this a little bit, and I think now they're like, oh, I'm so glad we did that. But we wanted to know what happens on a farm visit when people come to a farm and you tell them all about how dairy cows are housed, how they're raised, why we do the things that we do. What does that do to their knowledge? Are we going to effectively educate them? And then in turn, what does that do to their opinions and their concerns about dairy? And what we found, this is a very small sample, and it was in a very idiosyncratic kind of group of people. So these were people who were general public, but they were general public that were already interested in kind of food systems. They were on a slow food tour throughout BC, the Fraser Valley. So these are people that were already like quite activated to think about and care about maybe the philosophy of food production. And we did educate them. So their knowledge scores increased quite a bit, especially in areas around cow-calf separation or housing. The fact that cows need to give birth in order to actually make milk. But despite the fact that the sample learns more, we kind of got like this lovely little segmentation of perception shifts. Some people came away and we achieved like, selling dairy and advocating for dairy. But for some folks, they were like, no, like I learned more and I hate it. And so this was a, lovely study and I loved it, but also it was 50 people. So we decided to replicate it. And we replicated it in a different way. This was done led with my colleague Anna Marika Smid, who was formerly at the University of Calgary. So as part of her postdoc. And we wanted to dig into this a little bit more and see a couple of things. First, we wanted that's interesting. We wanted to do two things. One, we wanted to kind of redocument what's going on farm visits. Are people shifting knowledge? Are people shifting perceptions? We widened the scope a little bit, so we weren't just focused on welfare. We were also focused on environmental sustainability and kind of perceptions around food quality, around the pro-action pillars. And then I wanted to explore whether maybe different types of communicating on these tours might mediate perceptions. I'm going to circle back to number 2 in a minute, but we're just going to park that for a minute and focus on the first one. And so our approach this time, we did it in Alberta, and we worked with Alberta Milk, who host a series of events called Breakfast on the Farm. So nice. And we looked at 3 different open kind of farm events on 3 different farms, all kind of taking place within a week. This was in summer 2022. Another difference between this and the UBC study was at the UBC study, we had student researchers who were doing the tours. For this, it's farmers, mostly dairy farmers, active or potentially kind of recently retired farmers who are actually delivering the tours. These are farmers that would already be involved in this kind of breakfast on the farm, kind of widespread event. And then we trained them. And again, I'm going to circle back to that in a minute, but ignore it for a moment. We trained them in different ways. And then we surveyed the visitors to the farms. This was a really, it sounds like a really simple approach. It was a nightmare of a logistical challenge to do this. And it's all down to Anna Marika, the work that she put into organizing this. We had something like 30 graduate student volunteers on these. It was diabolical. We ended up surveying the visitors to each of these farms before, right kind of when they started and checked into the events, right around when they were eating their breakfasts that was cooked by the farmers. Then they went on a tour, and then we tried to grab them. They did another survey. And then if they provided their email addresses to us, we followed up with them 2 weeks later and surveyed them again. So that was also kind of a little novel element from the UBC study where we just did a pre and post snapshot. We ended up having 600 people initially, but my God, it's hard to chase after people after the farm. So we lost a whole lot. So that was, we were like, oh my God, we have 600 or 500 people. No, we had just under 300 people at the end of the sample, but still pretty good, better than 50. So to give you kind of a little look at what these farm tours looked like, this is, oh no, be smoother. Okay, but you can kind of just see some kind of footage of what these open farm days looked like on some of these farms. This is publicly available on Breakfast on the Dairy Farm. So these are massive events. So hundreds of people are coming to these farms. They're lovely, especially if you have a sunny day. One of our farms, it was not a lovely day. And you actually do see that a little bit on how much, even just the weather shapes perceptions. If they're slogging through mud, they're not going to have a nice day. Someone wore sandals. It was a whole thing. So it's lovely day, lots of work, so much effort goes into these. And when we look at the people who are coming to these, so these are in Alberta, either kind of outside of Edmonton or outside of Calgary, fairly rural locations. We have a very kind of different demographic profile compared to the folks that were in the UBC study. Mostly women, mostly kind of younger than me people. I'm still dealing with this. It's fine. We asked political affiliation this time. So we have kind of the most frequent are folks that are affiliated with the Conservative Party, and then we've kind of got a large amount of folks who are also I don't know, no politics, please. And then we've got a bit of a split. So about half urban dwellers, 22% in suburban areas and 27% in rural areas. So it's a bit of a demographic difference from here and the UBC folks. Although I will say we didn't ask as many demographics at the UBC. So I have no idea what the political affiliation, for example, was with our UBC study. As we found in 2016, the farm tours increased knowledge. We asked very much the same kind of and similar questions, but we improved knowledge. The farm tours effectively educate. This is not surprising because the farm tours are specifically like, here's how the cow is milked, and here's how we feed, and here's why we do what we do. So we are effectively educating people. It was a little bit different though, in what was going on with perceptions. So I'm just going to focus on cow welfare, but the trends are quite similar with the environmental perceptions and the food quality perceptions, with one kind of key difference. As you can see, we've got a little bit of a different kind of proportion going on here. A lot more people coming in high with their perceptions. Okay, so we're dealing with ceiling effects quite a bit. Everyone's, or most of our demographic here, already quite happy about dairy. So we just have a little bit who are like maybe a little less comfortable with cow welfare after the tour. When we followed up with them 2 weeks later, it's a little bit different. So we maybe get a little bit of a rebound. We have some thoughts about why we're seeing that, but we could talk about that. When we do look at the reasons for what people are sharing as their concerns and what they like about the farm, it's the same things that we saw in the 2016 study. People are worried or concerned about cow-calf separation. So we have a quote from someone sharing, the mother cows do not seem to form relationships with their babies, as right after birth they are removed from one another to reduce the spread of disease. So they understand why it's happening. But are the mothers okay with this? Is there an alternative to this? So we have helped them understand why it's done, or part of why it's done, but we're still not happy. And again, none of the 3 farms, they all looked a little different. They all operated a little differently, but none of the cows were out on pasture during the visits. And so we said, well, but okay, but I still think the cows should have pasture time. So these trials were run in June. So, okay. What do we do about that? Or do we do anything about that? What's the role of farm visits? Do they have a role? I wanted to kind of end this last kind of piece by sharing a little bit more about one of the motivations of that study. I mentioned that we were playing around with communication styles with the farmers. And this is an idea that I've been playing around with for a while in my head when it comes to thinking about engagements with other groups and public engagement in particular. And I mentioned that a little bit about knowledge and how if we share knowledge, we can't expect that everyone's going to agree with us. That is a very well described approach to scientific communication or ag communication or just expert communication. Historically, I think as scientists, as veterinarians, we've at least traditionally been kind of raised in the idea of we've spent so long building a body of expertise. We believe that this is the right thing to do because we hold all of this knowledge that we, bled for, and the reason that you don't agree with me on, vaccines or climate or whatever it is because you don't know the science the way I do. So it's very natural for us to want to say, just let me give you the science and then you're going to understand and then you'll agree with me. This is something that I do all the time. I try not to do it. It's funny when I teach my students about this because I'm falling into that trap as I'm talking about that trap. But this is the deficit model of communication, of public understanding. The idea being that if someone disagrees with us, it's because they don't have the same set of knowledge that we do. And if we give them the knowledge, then they will agree with us. This doesn't work, or maybe sometimes works a little bit. But I've been interested in how do we shift away from that into something that's maybe more of a dialogue, where I'm not the one in power and you're not the one, please give me the information. we're on an even playing field, and we come to the conversation in a little bit more of a place of curiosity, where we can start to understand where everyone is at, ask them questions, and see if we can find some shared values. So I was like, I was in my head about this when we were thinking about maybe we can get the farmers to play with this idea for the farm tours. So we trained the farmers. We had 31 farmers. Again, Anna Maria was a beast. This is a massive project. We trained 31 farmers on some kind of basics communication 101. Spoiler alert, it did not affect public perceptions or knowledge. And I have some thoughts about that, but we can discuss after officially the talk is done. But I want to share with you a little bit about what we were hoping to do with this and what the farmers themselves thought about this, because I think that's really interesting. So we had one group of farmers. We let the farmers self-select because we knew like there's no way that we're going to train or convince someone who doesn't want to do it a certain way. Like we needed to work with their personality and their interests and their styles. So this wasn't a perfectly like experimental approach. This is a mess. But one group of farmers were trained to just be like, just do what kind of you already do. You are the experts, it's true. You are the holder of knowledge. You are, as you approach and do these tours, you're going to just kind of do what's traditional. You're going to work on educating and raising awareness, explaining why you do what you do, lead the presentation of information, sure, like answer questions as they come up, and be very clear on why. But then in our other group, we tried to play with a little bit of a different style where, yeah, you're an expert, but you're also a facilitator of the conversation. You are, when you're talking and sharing about what's going on the farm, you're also checking in with the folks on the tour and saying, well, what do you do? What do you think about this? What a lot of our visitors on this particular study were immigrants from other countries, and some of them had come from dairy backgrounds and themselves, and so they would share like, oh yeah, I did this thing, and so we'd learn from each other a little bit. So like the focus is on creating space where the visitors, even though like maybe they've never been on a dairy farm before, they feel empowered to like really get curious and ask questions and really like dig in, like, well, why are those cows on chains? Whereas like most of the time you're like, we're just going to move along. So after they did the tours, then we did focus groups with the farmers to understand what their experience was of farm tours. How did they like them? Did they enjoy them? What did they come away with? We recorded these, we developed transcripts, and then ultimately I thematically analyzed these using a process called reflexive thematic analysis. I won't get into the minutiae of that. I wanted to share some of the themes that we came away with. And there were kind of three main kind of themes that we built. The first being kind of how farmers envision the public and who they are. What is the beast that is the public? And what that then meant for how they approach the farm tours and what that process feels like, and how they come to the farm tours and experience them as a result of their interactions with the public on these tours. And these kind of feed in and influence each other. And then in turn, their experiences of the public and how they enact these tours seem to mean something for how the farmers feel the future of their industry is going, and where the kind of these farm tours have a place in that future, in securing and protecting that future, not just to secure kind of more public buy-in, but I think there's also another interesting role that's happening. And so I don't have time to kind of go through all of these kind of the themes and the sub-themes of this, but I wanted to highlight just a few because I think they're quite special. Especially given around this kind of knowledge deficit kind of idea. The farmers talked a lot about what they thought the public were coming in with in terms of their knowledge. Some of them talked about, they just don't know anything. Some of them talked about, well, actually they have a little bit of knowledge. And then some of them shared about how the public actually have quite a bit of differing knowledge that's different than them, but still interesting. So one of the quotes, the black text is from farmers that were in the education only group, or the education group, and the blue text, you'll see some of the quotes are in the dialogue kind of farmer group. But this person, an education person sharing, so spoiler alert, disclaimer, a lot of these couple of next slides are going to be very text heavy. I'm sorry, but the quotes are so rich and interesting that I just can't help myself. So this person sharing, some people I thought like, okay, here we go. This should be easy. Looks like they have some understanding of cows. They're wearing cowboy boots. They're wearing a plaid shirt. They look a little agriculture. And I was like, no, these guys had no idea. But then there was this lady in Moroccan clothing. She knew about cows from Morocco. So it was super surprising to me. The different levels of knowledge were really big. That's kind of nice. So there's a very real conception that amongst this group of farmers that the public is not a monolith. The public is a diverse, rich group of people, which is great. I love that. And then this kind of influenced a little bit how they approached the farm tours, what they did and what they felt as as successes of these tours, and then how the public kind of received these tours. Roundly, the farmers, whether they were in kind of the education or the dialogue group, it's a win that they're educating the public. So one of our farmers from the education group sharing, it seems like people learned stuff that were on my tours. At least it seemed like they appreciated what we told them, and that they left the study or left the tour having a better understanding of the dairy industry. So this is a win, and it's really important. And for one of our dialogue farmers, that's there, but then they went a little bit further. Some of the groups, how they engaged, felt very connected, just really getting them to share their perspectives, kind of the whole safe space thing, that they kind of just say whatever they want. They wouldn't be judged for their silly questions. I really appreciate that. Hey, you might have an odd idea, but let us know anyways, because our industry has to keep moving. And I think that really helps people feel comfortable to share their funny thoughts, their out there thoughts. This farmer was amazing. I loved him. I loved all the farmers. They were really great and welcoming, especially as a non-farmer. And then from these conversations, it really became clear, and this was something that really surprised me. I didn't really have any of these ideas coming into this project with these conversations with the farmers, but how important it seems the tours were as a way to kind of fill their cup for the farmers. So all of these farmers are spread all out, but then they come together on these farm events, and there's a dozen or 24 of them in one space, so it's like a conference. It's like ISAE, but for farmers, which is the highlight of my year. So I really connected with how valuable that was for them. And it seems really silly, but it wasn't until I listened to these conversations that it really kind of came home to me. But the farm tours seem to really be functioning as important loci for building and resilience of the community. And helping them to kind of reaffirm their identity. And I think this is really important, especially given the mental health crisis that this profession is facing. I think this is something that, again, I think it serves a really valuable role. So one of our dialogue farmers, for example, sharing, what I like is just to see everyone's enthusiasm, whether you were with, the group A or group B, the dialogue or the education group. I just love the fact that everybody was out there. They were happy to be there. The farm owners were there. They were happy, we're interested in the well-being and the future of this industry. That's really what I took out of it. I thought that was really positive. And as a result, then, I think that maybe it's that, at least what we heard from these farmers, is that they feel that given how uncertain the future is for the dairy sector, for the agriculture sector, for just in general the world, farm tours seem to maybe be kind of helping not circle the wagons, but kind of reinforce and build some resilience and build some strength. And we heard this both from our education as well as our dialogue farmers. So our education farmer sharing, I think touring being one of the most effective ways. It's the most time consuming, and I guess the smallest impact when it comes to, for per people, but it's the greatest impact. You can only do so many people, obviously, but when you do it, you usually get very good results from it, and people leave with the best understanding and the best conversion rate. And our dialogue farmer sharing similarly, but a little different. At least having this discussion and knowing what our consumers are thinking and what's going on in their minds and some of the reasoning, I think that's good for us. I think it's our duty to be out there and to explain, to open our farms to the consumer, but then also be able to glean learnings from that on what the consumer is thinking and why. We can then use that for making decisions going forward on best management practices on the farm, but also as an industry. So I think for me, I like ending on that note because it just seems very hopeful. It helps me remember that I think when it comes to, the challenges facing the sustainability of the livestock sectors or honestly anything that we're thinking about, part of the puzzle, it's not the whole puzzle, but I think we really do need to spend a little bit more time looking at those intra and intergroup relationships. For the research community and for us, who are researchers, I think that you can consider social science, especially some of the more participatory approaches that people like Aaron have used. And if you're not a researcher, you're not in a research space necessarily, just, when you think about engagement, you think about communication, remember you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I think that's a good, recommendation for how much you should do from a speaking versus listening standpoint. So before I close, I'm going to do a shameless plug. This is my wonderful student, my master's student, Ava Trevanovic. She is in her master's doing a social science focused project to look to the goat sector and try to understand a little bit more about disbudding and horn management. She is recruiting anybody who has at least 1 goat who lives in the US or Canada. So please, I invite you to, if you have a goat, do take the survey. If you know someone with a goat or 100 or 1,000 goats, please send them the survey. There are some incentives. Canadian Tractor Supply gift card, I believe. I do request, please don't share it widely on social media because we only really want to recruit goat owners, not people pretending to be goat owners. Me, how I know that. Yes, okay, so I'll pop that back up later, or come chat to me. But for now, thank you so much for your wonderful attention. I look forward to having discussions with you over the next day or 2 that I'm here. Thank you especially to Seesaw and to Dr. Derek Haley for the invitation and for hosting me. There are a lot of people whose work I'm piggybacking off of, who have inspired me, who have supported me. Some of them are here, but not all of them. I'd like to also recognize the funders for these particular projects. And yeah, please reach out, have a chat, and I'm really delighted to meet and chat with you more. Thank you.